Welcome, travelers of time and seekers of forgotten stories. Today, we set our gaze upon the windswept steppes of Eurasia, where the grasslands stretched like oceans and the horizon was endless. Here, beneath the vast sky, lived a people of fire and steel, the Sarmatians. Their tales are carried not in books, but in whispers of the wind, in the graves of warriors, and in the echoes of hooves that once thundered across the earth. The Sarmatians were not just a nation, they were a force of nature. They rode like the storms, wielded weapons as extensions of their spirit, and lived by honor and freedom. Among them were women who stood shoulder to shoulder with men. Warriors whose strength and courage defied the traditions of their age. These shield maidens of the steppes became legends, re-war, inspiring myths from the Amazons of Greece to the tales of Valkyries in the north. As we journey together, prepare to encounter battles, mysteries, betrayals, and triumphs. This is not just history. It is the living pulse of a people whose legacy shaped empires and inspired legends. Welcome to the Sarmatians, Shieldmaidens and Steppe Winds. Imagine a battlefield where the earth trembles under 1,000 hooves, where the air burns with dust and the cries of war. Suddenly, in the chaos, a rider emerges. Not a man, but a woman, fierce-eyed, shield raised, her spear gleaming in the sun. She charges, and history itself shifts. These were no myths. They were the Sarmatians. Subscribe for more history. Like and comment if you believe history should never be forgotten, and share to spark conversation about the lessons we must learn from the past. This is not myth, this is history. And it begins here. The world opens not with cities or stone walls, but with a horizon that refuses to end. The Eurasian steppe stretches like an ocean of grass, rippling under the breath of the wind. Here, seasons do not pass quietly. They thunder across the land. Summer brings golden seas of tall grass and buzzing insects that fill the skies. Winter arrives as a storm of ice, merciless and unyielding, freezing even the rivers into silver roads. It is a land both beautiful and brutal, a crucible that shapes its people into warriors, survivors, and dreamers. It is within this boundless landscape that the Sarmatians were born. Unlike the settled farmers of distant valleys, they carried their homes upon wagons, their lives tied to the herds they followed. The horse was no mere beast of burden. It was their heart, their shield, their wings. From childhood, boys and girls alike learned to ride, their legs gripping the warm bodies of ponies as though they were born in the saddle. To master the horse was to master the steppe itself. The steppe gave nothing freely. To eat meant to hunt, to raid, or to herd tirelessly. Families gathered within yurts made of felt, the smoke of cooking fires rising into the endless sky. At night they told stories of spirits who wrote the winds, gods who guarded rivers, and ancestors who still watched from beyond the stars. The people of the steppe felt small before the vastness, but also infinite, for they knew that freedom lay in the ability to move, to follow the path where grass and sky led them. The Sarmatians were forged by this land of extremes. Harsh winters demanded strength, wide plains demanded speed, eternal horizons demanded courage. Out of these demands came not just warriors, but an entire culture of resilience. And in time, this resilience would carry them to the edges of the known world, to clash with empires, to inspire myths, and to ride into legends. But before battles and kingdoms, there was only this, the steppe itself, the endless, restless sea of grass, whispering to those who listened, "Ride, and you are free." The story of the Sarmatians does not begin in isolation. They rose from the shadows of another great people, the Scythians, masters of the steppe before them. For centuries, the Scythians had thundered across the grasslands, feared and admired by empires from Persia to Greece. They were the first to show the world that the bow and the horse, combined, could strike terror across continents. Yet history is a restless tide, and in time the Scythians' dominance began to fade. From the east, new tribes pushed westward, restless and hungry. Among them were the Sarmatians, kin to the Scythians in language and custom, but fierce rivals in ambition. Archaeology reveals their graves rising in the lands once ruled by Scythian kings. Slowly, like the grass reclaiming old fire-scorched earth, the Sarmatians took over. Their warriors carried long lances, their shields painted with symbols of storm and sky. Where the Scythians had relied on swift archery, the Sarmatians embraced heavier armor and shock cavalry, a style that would inspire armored knights centuries later. Their rise was not only a matter of war. The Sarmatians absorbed Scythian traditions, dress, ritual, and horse sacrifice, yet they reshaped them. Women, more than ever, held power. Their burials were filled with swords and armor, a silent testimony that the battlefield was not reserved for men alone. This blend of inheritance and innovation gave the Sarmatians their unique identity. Empires to the south, Persia, Greece, Rome, often could not distinguish Scythian from Sarmatian. To them, all steppe riders were barbarians, wild and free. But the steppe knew the difference. The Scythians were fading, and the Sarmatians were ascendant. By the dawn of the 1st century BCE, the winds of the grasslands no longer carried Scythian songs. They carried the war cries of the Sarmatians. It was the birth of a new force. The torch of the steppe had passed, and the world would soon learn their name. To understand the Sarmatians, one must first understand their devotion to the horse. For them, the horse was not merely an animal, but a partner, a guardian, and a symbol of freedom. Every aspect of life on the steppe revolved around these creatures. Food, travel, war, ritual. Without horses, there could be no Sarmatians. From the moment a child could walk, they were placed on the back of a pony. By 5 years old, they could ride without saddle or bridle, learning balance through instinct rather than tools. The horse was their cradle, their playmate, and eventually their weapon. Herds of wild horses roamed the steppe, and Sarmatian tribes measured their wealth not in gold or silver, but in the number of steeds they commanded. Rituals of life and death bound human and horse together. In battle, when a warrior fell, his horse was often buried with him, saddled and armed for the afterlife. Songs were sung of steeds that carried their masters through storms and bloodshed, of mares that guided lost riders home through blizzards, of stallions that seemed touched by gods themselves. The horse gave the Sarmatians speed unmatched by any settled nation. Their armies could strike swiftly and vanish like the wind, covering hundreds of miles in a matter of days. Roman chroniclers would one day write, with both awe and fear of Sarmatian cavalry, horse and rider armored like living fortresses, unstoppable in their charge. But beyond war, the horse was the steppe's heartbeat. Herding was a daily ritual. Taming was an art passed down from parent to child. Festivals often included horse races, not just as entertainment, but as sacred offerings to the gods of sky and wind. Even love stories were told in hoofbeats, of young men who proved their worth not with riches, but with the horses they could ride, capture, and gift. To the Sarmatians, the horse was life. To lose one was to lose a part of the soul, and so their people became forever bound to the rhythm of the steppe, galloping, thundering, unyielding. The spirit of the horse was the spirit of the Sarmatians themselves. Across much of the ancient world, war was considered the realm of men. Women were expected to stay behind the walls, to tend to children, to preserve the hearth. But on the endless steppe, no such walls existed. Life was harsh, survival uncertain, and strength was demanded from every member of the tribe. Out of this crucible rose the Sarmatian Shieldmaidens, women who fought not only to defend their families, but to lead armies, to raid and to conquer. Greek travelers were stunned to encounter these women. To the Hellenic mind, nurtured on tales of Amazons, fierce warrior women of myth, it seemed the legends had come alive. But these were no myths. They were real. Archaeology today confirms what ancient storytellers whispered. Graves filled with swords, shields, arrows, and armor belonged not to men, but to women. Nearly a quarter of Sarmatian warrior burials belonged to females, a testimony to the equality of blood on the battlefield. Training began young. Just as boys learned to ride, so too did girls. They learned to string bows, to hurl javelins, to master the deadly long lance that would one day terrify Rome. Their braids were tied with ornaments of bronze or silver, not as decoration alone, but as markers of their clan and their rank. Tattoos wound across their skin, telling stories of battles won, ancestors honored, and gods invoked. These shield maidens were more than warriors. They were leaders, mothers, and shamans. Some became queens, guiding their tribes through war and migration. Others fought alongside husbands, brothers, and sons, equals in the dance of death that was battle. Their very presence reshaped the fabric of society, proving that strength and courage were not bound by gender. It is said that when a Sarmatian woman took up the shield, she became like the storm itself, fierce, unstoppable, eternal. And though centuries would pass, her legacy would echo, inspiring tales of Amazons, Valkyries, and countless warrior queens of legend. The birth of the shield maidens was not an invention of myth, but a reality of necessity. In the vast, unforgiving steppe, survival demanded warriors, and warriors rose whether man or woman. And so, the shield maidens carved their place into history with steel, fire, and freedom when the winds howled across the endless steppe, and snow swept like knives against the earth. The Sarmatians found warmth and belonging within the circular walls of the yurt. To outsiders, it may have seemed a simple tent of felt and wood, but to the nomads of the grasslands, it was home, a sacred space where family, fire, and spirit converged. The yurt was more than shelter. It was a microcosm of the universe. Its round form reflected the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The smoke hole at the center was not just a vent for fire, but a symbolic connection to the heavens. Families would gather around the central hearth, flames flickering as stories were shared of ancestors, gods, and legendary warriors who had once thundered across the steppes. Daily life inside the yurt was both practical and ritualistic. Women brewed mare's milk into kumis, a fermented drink that sustained warriors on long rides. Children played with carved bone toys, while their parents mended clothing stitched from hide and wool. Warriors sharpened weapons by the glow of the fire, while elders traced patterns in the dust to teach lessons of fate and the old gods. Every object within had meaning. Rugs woven with red and black patterns told of tribal identity. Bone charms dangled from the rafters to ward off spirits. Weapons rested close at hand, for danger was never far. The yurt was not only a dwelling, but also a fortress of spirit, movable and eternal, carried on wagons from pasture to pasture. When night fell and the steppe outside lay silent under a canopy of stars, families huddled together beneath firs, The sound of wind brushing the felt walls mingled with whispers of old songs, lullabies that spoke of horses, rivers, and gods of fire. To be born in a yurt was to be born into a world of movement, freedom, and deep connection to the land. For the Sarmatians, life in the yurt was not temporary. It was timeless. The yurt traveled with them, carrying the soul of the family wherever the winds blew. Within its walls, warriors became children again, and children were prepared to become warriors. It was here that laughter mixed with sorrow, love with loss, and the heartbeat of the Sarmatians endured. For the Sarmatians, the steppe was not empty. It was alive, breathing with unseen powers. Every gust of wind, every rolling storm, every blazing fire carried the presence of spirits and gods. They did not build temples of stone. The steppe itself was their cathedral, the sky their roof, the winds their hymns. Their gods were many, but always tied to the forces of nature. The Sky Father, vast and eternal, was worshipped through fire and smoke. The Earth Mother was honored in offerings of milk and bread, scattered upon the soil before journeys and hunts. The wind, however, was most sacred. It was the voice of the unseen, carrying messages from ancestors, omens from gods, and whispers of fate. To ride against the wind was to defy it. To ride with it was to be blessed by its power. Rituals often took place at dawn or dusk, when the sky burned red. Families gathered around sacred fires, their shamans chanting in rhythm with the wind's howl. Smoke curled upward, believed to carry prayers to the heavens. Horses, too, played their role. A sacred horse might be sacrificed, its spirit believed to gallop with the gods. Shamans wore cloaks of feathers, bone amulets, and antlered headdresses, their bodies painted with swirling tattoos. They inhaled herbs and entered trances, speaking with voices not their own. To the Sarmatians, they were bridges between worlds, the living and the dead, the mortal and the divine. Children were taught to listen to the wind. If it whispered sharply, danger was near. If it swirled gently, journeys would be safe. Warriors prayed before battle, casting milk upon the earth and lifting swords to the sky. Women whispered blessings into the wind for safe childbirth, for fertility of herds, for protection of kin. Every storm was a warning. Every calm breeze was a promise. The steppe was a dialogue between mortal and divine, and the Sarmatians lived within that conversation daily. To them, the gods were not distant figures, but companions riding beside them, unseen but ever present. And so, when their armies charged across the plains, they believed it was not just men and women who thundered into battle, but the very gods of the winds riding with them. To live on the steppe was to live on the edge of survival. A man or woman without loyalty, without honor, could not be trusted to stand in battle. Among the Sarmatians, warriors were bound not only by blood but by oath. Sacred promises sworn before fire, ancestors, and the endless sky. These oaths were more than words. They were lifelines that held tribes together. TB7 Parsi. The warrior's oath was often taken in youth, at the moment a rider first proved themselves in combat or in a great hunt. The initiate stood before the tribe, weapon in hand, horse at their side, and swore to protect kin, to avenge betrayal, and to never abandon comrades in battle. To break such an oath was to lose honor, and without honor, a warrior was no longer truly alive. Ceremonies were dramatic, infused with ritual. A fire blazed in the center of the gathering, its smoke rising to the heavens. Elders chanted the names of ancestors, calling them to witness the vow. A cup of fermented mare's milk, bitter and strong, was drunk as a symbol of endurance. Some warriors cut their palms, letting blood fall upon the earth, binding themselves in sacrifice to the soil that fed their people. chupis. But the oath was not merely to fight. It was also to protect, to shield the vulnerable, to honor the gods, to keep the traditions alive. Women took the oath as well as men, their vows no less binding. In this way, the Sarmatians ensured that courage flowed equally through all veins of their people. Stories were told of warriors who kept their oath even in death. A rider who stood his ground, though his comrades had fallen, refusing to retreat, became a legend. Another who avenged a slain brother by riding into enemy lands alone was sung about for generations. These tales reinforced the oath's power. It was not only a pledge but the heartbeat of Sarmatian identity. To swear the warrior's oath was to join a chain that stretched back through the ancestors and forward into eternity. It was not just a promise to the tribe, but to the very spirit of the steppe. The Sarmatians were masters of adaptation. Every weapon they wielded reflected the environment they lived in. Wide plains that demanded speed, cunning, and versatility. Their arsenal was simple, but devastatingly effective. The composite bow, made of wood, horn, and sinew, was short enough to fire from horseback, yet powerful enough to pierce. Arrows tipped with bone or bronze rained down on enemies long before a clash of steel. Close combat, the Sarmatians wielded the long lance, some over 4 meters in length, transforming cavalry charges into unstoppable walls of death. Shields of wicker and hide were light but resilient, carried by men and women alike. What set the Sarmatians apart was not only their weapons but their skill. They trained endlessly, firing arrows backward while galloping at full speed, striking targets with unerring precision. Their lances turned them into battering rams, and their swords, short, curved, deadly, made them lethal even when dismounted. To face the Sarmatians was to face an enemy who was both storm and fire, distant death through arrows, then sudden annihilation through the spear. For the Sarmatians, memory was sacred. They left few writings, but their history was carried in song and story. Around campfires, elders sang of legendary battles, heroic riders, and gods who walked the winds. Each generation learned its place through these tales, bound by a chain of memory stretching back to the dawn of their people. Songs were also weapons of identity. To sing of an ancestor's deeds was to call their spirit into the present. Before battles, warriors chanted ancestral songs, believing the dead would ride with them. After victory, bards celebrated fallen comrades, so their names would never vanish. Tattooed across arms and chests were symbols tied to these songs. Eagles for courage, spirals for eternity, horses for freedom. The body became a living story, carrying ancestors into every battle. Through song, the Sarmatians never truly died. To the Sarmatians, tattoos were more than decoration. They were living scripture. Each mark told a story, victories in war, lineage, prayers to gods or vows taken. Warriors bore spirals of black and red ink across their arms and faces, signs that even in death, their identities would not be erased. Greek observers marveled and feared at these painted barbarians, but to the Sarmatians, tattoos connected flesh with spirit. A rider might tattoo a horse across his chest for speed in battle. A mother might mark her arms with spirals, invoking fertility and strength. Shamans bore the most elaborate tattoos, entire bodies painted as maps of the cosmos. To cut into skin and fill it with ink was an act of permanence in a world where nothing stayed still. The grass moved, the herds roamed, the winds shifted, but tattoos endured, a testament that the spirit was unbroken. No tribe ruled the steppe alone. The Sarmatians' rise came with alliances and rivalries. They traded, warred, and intermarried with neighbors, Scythians, Thracians, Persians. Each encounter reshaped them. At times, alliances forged powerful coalitions, enabling great raids into Europe. At other times, rivalries erupted into bloodshed. The steppe was as shifting as the wind. Today's ally could be tomorrow's enemy. These relationships trained the Sarmatians to adapt, to fight with cunning, and to absorb the best of other cultures. Theirs was a world where survival depended on both diplomacy and the spear. The Seth, when Greek traders and soldiers encountered Sarmatian women in armor, they believed they had found the Amazons of legend. For centuries, stories of women warriors had filled Greek epics. Here, on the steppe, myth and reality collided. Greek historians wrote with awe of women who fought on horseback, who bore tattoos, who led men in battle. They could not accept that these women were real, and so folded them into myth. But the truth was that the Sarmatian shield maidens were flesh and blood, and their power left an indelible mark on Greek imagination. The Amazon tales were born not in fantasy, but in the sight of Sarmatian women riding like storms across the horizon. The might of Rome eventually met the fury of the steppe. The Sarmatians, hired at times as allies and feared as enemies, clashed with Roman legions. Their lances shattered shields. Their cavalry charges broke formations. Rome, disciplined but slow, struggled to withstand the speed of the nomadic horsemen. Roman accounts describe armored riders, men and women alike, who seemed more beast than human, encased in iron and charging with unstoppable force. Yet Rome learned, Rome adapted, and the Sarmatians became both enemy and mercenary in Rome's endless wars. This clash was not just military, but cultural. The empire of walls versus the freedom of the open steppe. Not all battles were fought against Rome. Many Sarmatians fought for the great empires, hired as mercenaries, trusted for their unrivaled cavalry skills. In Britain, Sarmatian cavalry regiments defended Rome's northern frontiers. In Persia, they raided desert lands as allied riders. To fight as mercenaries was both survival and opportunity. Payment brought wealth, trade, and influence. Yet many feared that service under foreign banners dulled their independence. Still, wherever they rode, their reputation grew. Horse warriors without equal, the steppe was a web of shifting alliances. To survive, tribes intermarried, exchanged gifts, and bound their futures together. But alliances were fragile, often shattered by pride or betrayal. Sarmatian chiefs forged bonds with Goths, Alans, and other nomadic tribes, uniting armies for raids that thundered across Europe. Marriages between leaders' children sealed pacts. Yet, beneath every alliance was the unspoken truth: the steppe belonged to no one forever. Still, these alliances extended Sarmatian influence, making them a force feared from the Danube to the Caspian. On the Eurasian steppe, childhood was never a gentle thing. Life demanded resilience from the very beginning, and for the daughters of the Sarmatians, it was no different. From the moment they could walk, they were set upon ponies, their small hands gripping reins, their legs gripping the animal's warm flanks. By the age of 6, they could ride faster than most foreign men who had trained for years. Childhood games were not dolls and playhouses, but mock hunts with wooden bows, horse races across the grass, and the practice of stringing miniature arrows. Unlike in distant lands where daughters were confined to the hearth, Sarmatian girls were prepared for the battlefield alongside their brothers. Their mothers taught them to braid their hair tight so it would not fly wild in the wind of battle. Fathers gifted them miniature lances, laughing proudly when the little ones struck their targets. Elders told stories of great shield maidens who had led raids and defended the people in times of peril. The daughters of the steppe grew up with no illusions. They knew that one day they might face enemies, ride into raids, or die with a weapon in their hand. Yet their training was not cruel, it was empowering. Every skill learned was survival, every practice drill and honor. By adolescence, many girls could shoot a bow while riding at full gallop, their arrows striking with deadly accuracy. By 15, some had already fought in skirmishes, returning with scars worn as badges of pride. Their upbringing shaped them into warriors, who were more than soldiers. They were defenders of their tribes, heirs to ancestral tradition, and embodiments of the balance between life and death. A Sarmatian daughter could be a herder in the morning, a singer by the fire in the evening, and a warrior by the following dawn. When outsiders spoke of Amazons, they imagined a strange anomaly, women who rejected family and tradition to live in battle. But for the Sarmatians, daughters did not have to reject anything. They were warriors and daughters, mothers and shield maidens, carriers of lineage and defenders of freedom. They were the living proof that the winds of the steppe demanded strength from all, not just half. And so the steppe raised its daughters in steel and fire, not because they were Amazons, but because they were Sarmatians. From the windswept plains rose women whose names echoed like thunder, shield maidens who led not from behind, but from the front. To their people, they were not anomalies, but the natural result of a world where survival demanded the strength of every soul. One such warrior was remembered as Allah, daughter of a chieftain, who fought with a long spear and carved her name into legend. As tales go, she led a band of warriors into battle against invaders, rallying both men and women. When her shield shattered under the crush of spears, she did not retreat. Instead, she seized a fallen banner and charged, her cry carrying across the battlefield. Legions like Allah shaped the Sarmatians' identity. Leaders were chosen for courage, not gender. Shield maidens were captains, tacticians, and, in times of war, queens. They carried spears taller than themselves, shields painted with animal totems, and faces marked with tattoos of victory. To their tribes, they were storms given flesh. Foreign chroniclers, stunned by their presence, wrote of them as if they were impossible, half myth, half woman. Yet for the Sarmatians, they were very real, and their example lit fires in the hearts of the next generation. Life on the steppe knew no divisions between roles. A woman could be both a mother and a warrior, with her hands equally skilled in braiding her child's hair and in drawing a bow. To outsiders, this was impossible. To the Sarmatians, it was survival. Many shield maidens bore children and raised them within yurts, filled with weapons and stories of war. Infants slept beside shields. Toddlers played with miniature bows. A mother might nurse her child in the morning and lead a raid by evening. Her children grew up watching her return bloodied but unbroken, living proof that the hearth and battlefield were not separate worlds. Burial mounds reveal women buried with both ornaments of family life, mirrors, combs, jewelry, and the weapons of war. They lived in both worlds. Their society revered them, not as divided beings, but as complete, mothers who protected their kin with love and steel alike. This dual role reinforced the idea that in Sarmatian culture, strength was holistic. To nurture was not weakness. To fight was not the opposite of love. Both were necessary, both were sacred. The presence of warrior women among the Sarmatians reverberated far beyond the steppe. To the Greeks, they were Amazons. To the Persians, demon women. To northern tribes, precursors of Valkyries. The shield maidens became myth because settled peoples could not comprehend their reality. Greek scribes turned their stories into epic poetry, imagining whole nations of women who rejected men. Scandinavian sagas centuries later would tell of women who chose the sword over the loom. Yet at the heart of these tales lay the truth of Sarmatian life. Women did fight, led, and die as warriors. These myths exaggerated, twisted, and glamorized. But the roots were real. The shield maidens' memory became immortal not only in their own people's songs, but in the imagination of civilizations they touched. Thus, the Sarmatian women shaped global myth, becoming eternal archetypes of courage, ferocity, and freedom the earth itself remembers. Archaeologists uncover the resting places of Sarmatian women who were queens and warriors alike. In burial mounds across the steppe, bodies lie adorned with treasures, swords, spears, shields, jewelry, mirrors, and sacrificed horses. One grave tells of a woman leader, perhaps a queen. Her skeleton rests clad in bronze-scale armor. At her side, a long lance. Around her neck, beads of amber and silver. Her fingers clutch a sword hilt, as though she refused to surrender it, even in death. Beside her lie the remains of horses, buried to carry her into the afterlife. Such burials defy the expectations of neighboring civilizations. Here was proof that women commanded, fought, and were honored with the rights of warriors. To her people, she was more than a mother or wife. She was a leader, a shield of her tribe, and her memory was eternalized in earth and song. The burial of such women ensures that their voices are not lost. The steppe still whispers of queens who ruled with both ferocity and wisdom. Their legacy, riding in the wind, the Sarmatians reached the height of their power, not only because of courage, but because of cavalry mastery unlike anything the world had yet seen. Through, they perfected the art of armored riders, horse and human, merged into a single unstoppable force. Their horses were clad in lamellar armor of iron or bronze, fritzed, covering neck and chest with overlapping plates that glittered in the sun. Riders themselves wore scale armor of bronze, iron, or hardened leather, covering body and limbs. Helmets with narrow slits gave them a fearsome, almost inhuman appearance. To enemies, they looked like living fortresses. But their true innovation was the Kontos, a long, heavy lance wielded with two hands. Unlike the short Roman spear, this weapon could pierce shield walls and armor. When dozens of Sarmatian riders charged together, their Kontos lowered, they struck like a tidal wave. The King Fofanikinses. Training was lifelong. Warriors and horses practiced side by side, learning to pivot, wheel, and charge as one. It was not just battle skill, but an expression of harmony between rider and steed. To face Sarmatian cavalry was to face a force of nature. Wind-given armor, the Sarmatians did not live by war alone. They thrived at the crossroads of great trade routes, their lands linking east and west. From China came silk, light as the wind and precious beyond gold. From Persia came fine carpets and gems. From Rome came iron, glassware, and wine. In exchange, the Sarmatians offered horses, strong, swift, and battle-trained. They traded hides, furs, and amber, but most of all, they traded their martial service. Kings and emperors paid in treasure for their cavalry, spreading Sarmatian influence across empires. Markets on the steppe were vibrant, with yurts filled with silks that shimmered in firelight and swords forged from Roman steel. Women wore silver necklaces from Persia, while men drank Roman wine from decorated cups. Yet despite luxury, they never became fully sedentary. Trade enriched them, but the steppe remained their home. They were both warriors and merchants, their spears defending caravans, and their horses carrying goods across continents. Theirs was a world of silk and iron, where wealth and war were inseparable. The Sarmatians stood at the crossroads of empires. To their south lay Persia and Parthia. To the west, Rome. To the east, the Silk Road stretched toward China. This position made them indispensable and dangerous. Diplomats from mighty kingdoms sought alliances with them, offering gold, land, or titles. Yet alliances with the Sarmatians were as shifting as the winds. They were fiercely independent, never fully conquered, never fully controlled. They played empires against each other, ensuring their survival and influence. Some Sarmatian leaders were invited to courts of kings, where they dazzled with their exotic dress, braided hair, and fearless speech. Others clashed directly with empires, raiding borders and seizing wealth. The steppe gave them the power of mobility, allowing them to appear like a storm at the gates of empires, then vanish into the horizon. This role as intermediaries and disruptors cemented their place in history, not as builders of cities, but as the restless heart of the grasslands, shaping the destinies of the empires that surrounded them. Among the most famous legends of the Sarmatians was a battle where women warriors formed a shield wall that turned the tide of war. Invaders struck a Sarmatian camp, expecting men to defend while women fled. Instead, the women gathered shields, swords, and spears, standing shoulder to shoulder. Their line was unbroken, their cries fierce. For hours they held, their shields locking together, arrows deflected, spears thrusting outward like a forest of death. When the men returned from a distant raid, they found not defeat but victory, the enemy slain, their women standing bloodied but unbroken. From that day, the tale spread across the steppe that Sarmatian women were not merely defenders but warriors, capable of holding the line against overwhelming odds. The shield wall of women became a symbol of their people's spirit, resilience, unity, and fearlessness. Though warriors and nomads, the Sarmatians were not without rulers. Their society was led by kings and queens, chosen not solely by birth but by merit and respect. Leaders were expected to fight alongside their people, to share hardships, and to embody the warrior's oath. Some tribes followed kings, others queens. Women could rise to supreme leadership if their courage and wisdom outshone others. Leaders wore crowns of fur and bronze, sat in great yurts adorned with silks, and commanded loyalty not through fear but through deeds. Rulership was fragile, however. The steppe was no empire of stone. Power was always contested, alliances shifting like sand. Yet for centuries, Sarmatian rulers balanced strength with diplomacy, ensuring their people's survival in a world of mighty empires. Their memory endures as proof that leadership was not bound to gender, but to courage and vision. The golden age of the Sarmatians did not last forever. From the north and west came a new storm, the Goths, fierce Germanic tribes who swept across Europe, displacing all who stood in their path. Their warriors, tall and broad, carried long swords and heavy shields, and their hunger for land drove them deep into Sarmatian territories. At first, the Sarmatians resisted with cavalry charges, lances crashing against Gothic shield walls. But the Goths were numerous and relentless. Their migrations were not single armies, but entire nations on the move. Warriors, families, herds, wagons. The endless tide wore down the Sarmatian strength. Many tribes fought bravely, some forming uneasy alliances, others falling in battle. Clashes raged across the steppe, leaving burial mounds filled with both Sarmatians and Goths. The invaders brought not only war but change. Their pressure fractured the Sarmatian world, driving tribes apart, forcing some to flee further south into Roman lands. The storm of the Goths marked the first great unraveling of the Sarmatians' dominance. If the Goths were a storm, the Huns were lightning, sudden, devastating, and unstoppable. Swift riders from the east, the Huns struck terror into all who saw them. Small, fast horses carried them at unimaginable speed, while their composite bows could strike with deadly accuracy in motion. For the Sarmatians, the arrival of the Huns was catastrophic. The two peoples were kin of the steppe, but the Huns were fiercer, more ruthless, and better organized. Tribes that resisted were annihilated. Tribes that surrendered were absorbed into the Hun Confederation. Legends say entire Sarmatian clans vanished. In a single night, their camps burned, their yurts reduced to ash. Women and children were taken, warriors cut down without mercy. The Sarmatians had been the terror of settled empires. Now they were the ones facing annihilation from a people even more fearsome than themselves. The Huns did not erase the Sarmatians immediately, but they shattered their unity. Many became vassals, riding under the banner of Attila himself. Others fled westward, merging into distant lands. The steppe had a new master, and the Sarmatians were forced to adapt or vanish in the aftermath of Gothic and Hun invasions. The once mighty Sarmatians fractured. Entire tribes vanished, their names remembered only in songs. Some merged with other steppe peoples, their identity swallowed by the tides of history. Others fled into Roman territory, settling far from the grasslands that had shaped them. These were the lost tribes, remnants of a great people scattered to the winds. Archaeology uncovers traces of them, Sarmatian-style weapons in foreign lands, jewelry buried far from the steppe, Roman documents recording settlements of Sarmatian refugees. Their decline was not an end, but a transformation. Though the tribes as a whole faded, their culture, traditions, and bloodlines lived on in those they joined. Echoes of the Sarmatians are found in the Alans, the Ossetians, and other descendants who carried fragments of their legacy forward. The steppe no longer belonged to them, but their spirit endured. Hidden in the veins of new peoples, some Sarmatians were not destroyed, but resettled by Rome itself. After victories over the tribes, Rome often recruited Sarmatian cavalry as auxiliaries. Thousands were sent west, even as far as Britain, where their descendants may have lived for centuries. Imagine the disorientation of a steppe rider, suddenly gazing upon the misty hills of Britannia, so far from the endless plains. They brought their skills with them, their Kontos lances, their scale armor, their tattooed traditions. Roman chroniclers marveled at these strange horsemen who could scatter enemies with their furious charges. In Britain, legends grew of horse warriors who defended Hadrian's wall, their presence remembered in folk tales. Some scholars even suggest that stories of knights and Arthurian horsemen may echo these distant Sarmatian cavalry transplanted from the steppe into the heart of Rome's empire. Thus, though far from their homeland, the Sarmatians left an indelible mark on the Roman frontier. As centuries passed, the name Sarmatian faded. By the late Roman Empire, they were no longer a united people but fragments scattered across Europe and Asia. Some became Alans, others blended into Slavic and steppe tribes. Their distinct identity dissolved, yet memory persisted. Roman writers spoke of their cavalry. Greek legends of Amazons carried echoes of their women warriors. Archaeologists today still uncover graves with weapons and armor buried beside women, proving the legends were truth. Forgotten in name, they were remembered in influence. Their techniques of cavalry inspired medieval knights. Their myths lived on in stories of Amazons and Valkyries. Their descendants carried fragments of their spirit into new peoples. The Sarmatians may have vanished as a nation, but as long as the wind whispers across the steppe, they are remembered. The winds of the steppe bury many things, but they also preserve. Over centuries, beneath grass and earth, the Sarmatians slept, until archaeologists uncovered their secrets. Burial mounds, called kurgans, revealed warriors laid to rest with armor, weapons, and sacrificed horses. Some graves held women with lances and swords, confirming ancient tales of shield maidens were more than myth. Excavations revealed arrowheads still sharp, ornaments of gold shaped like deer or eagles, and intricate belt buckles that once flashed in battle. Even fragments of fabric dyed red or blue survived in the earth, telling of artistry as well as war. Perhaps the most haunting discoveries were the skeletons, warriors whose bones bore marks of healed wounds, of lives spent in combat. Some women were buried in full armor, their bodies tattooed in patterns that still clung faintly to skin preserved by soil. Each discovery gave voice to those who had thundered across the plains long ago. Archaeology turned myth into memory, and memory into truth. Science gave the Sarmatians a new voice. Through DNA analysis, researchers uncovered the genetic legacy of these horse lords. Their remains revealed connections stretching across Eurasia, eastward into Central Asia, westward into Eastern Europe. Their bloodlines were a mosaic. They carried markers of Indo-Iranian heritage, linking them to Scythians and Alans. But they also bore traces of intermarriage with neighboring tribes, proof that the steppe was a crossroads of peoples, isolated world. Most astonishingly, modern Ossetians of the Caucasus carry clear genetic ties to the Sarmatians, their language and traditions echoing steppe ancestry. In this way, the Sarmatians are not extinct but transformed, living still in the veins of modern peoples. DNA confirmed what songs and myths hinted. The Sarmatians were not a vanished people, but a branch of the human tree that still flourishes, though their name faded. Echoes of the Sarmatians lived on in Slavic lands. Russian and Polish folklore preserved stories of warrior horsemen and fierce women who fought beside them. Even place names and tribal memories carried Sarmatian roots. And medieval chronicles spoke of peoples who came from the steppe, their presence shaping the early Slavic world. Warriors prayed to ancestors in ways reminiscent of Sarmatian rites. Folk songs told of maidens who rode with spears, echoing Shieldmaiden traditions. In Poland, noble families even claimed descent from Sarmatians, calling themselves the Sarmatists. In the Xulokth and Xurchith centuries, Polish nobles proudly wore Oriental-inspired dress, carrying curved sabers, and declaring that their blood flowed from the steppe. Whether true or myth, the idea of Sarmatian ancestry shaped entire cultures. Thus, though scattered, the Sarmatians lived on in memory, shaping identities long after their nation disappeared. The myth of the Amazons found root in the Sarmatians. Greek writers described entire nations of warrior women, and though exaggerated, they were inspired by real encounters. Archaeological evidence proves women fought and were buried with weapons, confirming the source of these stories. Queens of legend, whether called Amazons, Valkyries, or Shieldmaidens, reflected Sarmatian women who led tribes, commanded armies, and rode into battle. These queens blurred the line between myth and history. Even centuries later, poets and historians recalled them. In medieval times, tales of warrior queens circulated through Europe, their origins tangled with Sarmatian reality. In truth, the Amazon queens were not fantasies. They were the echoes of real women whose graves still hold swords, spears, and crowns. Though scattered, the Sarmatians left their greatest gift to Europe, cavalry tradition. Their style of warfare, heavy armored riders with long lances, became the foundation of medieval knights. Rome adopted their tactics, training cavalry units after Sarmatian models. Later, Germanic and Slavic peoples refined these methods, blending them with local traditions. By the Middle Ages, Europe's knightly class rode in a style born on the steppe. The bond between rider and horse, the thunder of lances in charge, the image of armored warriors, all had roots in the Sarmatians. Though few remembered their name, every knight who lowered a lance carried their spirit. Thus, the horse lords of the steppe became the unseen ancestors of Europe's mounted elite. The Sarmatians were among the first to perfect cataphract cavalry. Riders and horses both encased in armor, moving as a living wall of steel. Their scale armor, made of small overlapping plates of bronze or iron sewn onto leather, was light enough to allow speed, yet strong enough to turn blades. Horses, too, wore chest and neck plates, giving the rider a fortress on hooves. When Rome fought against them, they quickly recognized the power of such armor. Soon, Roman cavalry imitated Sarmatian designs, and later, European knights refined the concept into full suits of plate. What began on the open steppe, with smiths hammering scales by firelight, became the shining knights of the Middle Ages. Thus, the armor of the Sarmatians left a legacy not of decay, but of transformation. A direct ancestor of European chivalry, the Sarmatians spoke an Iranian tongue, part of the great Indo-European family. Yet unlike Latin or Greek, their language was not preserved in books or carved into stone. It lived in the wind, carried through songs, chants, and oaths. Fragments survive in names recorded by Greeks and Romans, chieftains, rivers, tribal titles. Later, scholars traced echoes of their speech in Ossetian, the modern descendant of the Alans, proving that their tongue, though transformed, still whispers in the Caucasus Mountains. 2. Their words are mostly lost, but their spirit remains. Just as their songs once vanished into the sky, so too their language rides on the winds, eternal yet unseen. Among the Sarmatians, women were not only warriors but symbols of fire and endurance. They bore flames in hearths, carried fire into battle, and embodied the fierce spark of survival. Many shield maidens were remembered in tales as women of fire, their courage burning brighter than the sun. Some legends tell of women who carried torches into battle, igniting enemy camps. Others recall queens who held fire rituals before war, praying to gods of flame and wind for victory. Archaeological evidence shows hearths inside women's graves, symbolic of their eternal role as keepers of fire even in death. Their fire was literal and symbolic. Flames of battle, flames of home, flames of spirit. They were both nurturers and destroyers, their duality feared and revered. The legacy of these women burned into myths that traveled far beyond the steppe, inspiring tales of fiery goddesses and warrior queens. The Sarmatians may have vanished as a nation, but their myth endured, morphing into new stories through centuries. Greeks called them Amazons, Scandinavians saw Valkyries, Persians feared demon women. In medieval Europe, echoes of their cavalry lived on in knights. In Poland, nobles claimed Sarmatian descent. Even today, novels, films, and art resurrect their image. Shield maidens inspire modern depictions of Amazons in fantasy. Their warrior queens appear in historical fiction. Their burial sites spark documentaries and debates among scholars. What was once dismissed as myth has become validated by science and archaeology, proving the Sarmatians were not just legends, but architects of reality. Modern people look at their story and see both inspiration and identity. Proof that forgotten peoples can still shape the imagination of the world, though their name has faded. The spirit of the Sarmatians is eternal. Their warriors thunder no more across the steppe. Their yurts stand silent. Their banners fall into dust. Yet in memory, in myth, and in the echoes of history, they still ride. The last Sarmatians may have vanished into other peoples, their voices lost to the winds, but the steppe remembers. Every gust of wind that ripples the grass carries whispers of their lances and hooves. Every burial mound is a monument to their defiance. Every myth of a warrior queen or mounted knight is a shadow of their legacy. Theirs was a people who embodied freedom, resilience, and equality. They proved that women could be warriors, that horse and human could be one, that nations could live without walls yet shape empires. And so, their story closes not with an end, but with a ride into eternity. For as long as horses gallop, as long as the wind howls across the steppe, the Sarmatians live on. As the winds of the steppe quiet and the last echoes of hooves fade into the horizon, we are left with more than history. We are left with a legacy. The Sarmatians were not carved into marble or preserved in palaces of stone. Their memory lived in the earth, in the bones of warriors, in the stories of queens and daughters who carried shields beside men. They were a people who defied the limits of their age. They proved that courage knows no gender, that freedom can be a homeland, and that the bond between rider and horse can shape empires. Though centuries buried their name, they live on in myths of Amazons and Valkyries, in the traditions of knights, and in the descendants who still carry their blood. Tonight, we have ridden with them, across fire and storm, across victory and decline, across memory and myth. Their story reminds us that no people are truly forgotten, so long as someone listens, remembers, and tells their tale. Thank you for journeying with me through the world of the Sarmatians, Shieldmaidens, and Steppe Winds. Until the winds call again. Ride free, and remember the eternal steppe